Talk Shoes. Recorded live.
Good morning, good evening, wherever it may be, across the nation or around the world. Once again, you are listening to the VMware Communities Roundtable Podcast. This is podcast number 568. My name is Eric Nilsson. With me today, I have my alternate co-host, Corey Romero. Today is Wednesday, August 18th, 2021. Matt Lungeth is out at a customer visit, so he can't be with us today. But Corey, welcome back as co-host. How's it going? How's the weather out there in Utah?
Going well. The weather is interesting. August, this is our third August here in Utah, and August by far is my favorite month of the year. We get these just amazing thunder and lightning storms that just roll through. And I don't know if you can even hear in the backyard, it's booming right now. And the echoes can last for over a minute and a half. And so you get one lightning in the valley and it just bounces off all of the mountains around us. And so, the weather here has been absolutely fantastic. Finally getting rid of a little bit of smoke. I think it's pushing a little bit more north towards Montana, which is not good for them, but, good for us. How's everything in California, and how is the color of the bay?
Well, let me tell you, before we get to the color of the bay, I just want to talk about what we've got. We got a great show today here. We have Mohan today, and we'll introduce Mohan in a minute, but we're going to be talking about what it's like to deploy and manage Kubernetes in a multi-cloud environment. He's got a great blog series out. So if you get a chance, you're listening to this, you can go check out his blog, or you can join us on vBarbecue. We're going to show some diagrams of what we're going to talk about. So I'm really excited to cover Kubernetes, and I've done some studying on the topic and read through the whole blog, and I think it's finally clicking all the pieces now that allow us to run modern applications, Kubernetes based microservices in a multi-cloud environment using Tanzu Grid, Tanzu Service Mesh, as well as Tanzu Mission Control. So we're going to be covering that today in the show. So we'll just jump over to Mohan. Mohan, welcome to the show. Where are you located?
Thanks, Eric. I'm located in Fremont, California, so pretty close to where you are. And I work in the Palo Alto campus, and I've been. Nice.
Yep. All right. Well, with that color of the bay, it is an orangish green because the fires up in the Sierra Nevadas, the wind is circling back through, and we have an orange glow today in the Bay Area. So we have not escaped the sooty weather that we get sometimes in fire season, and I feel bad for those that are still dealing with fires up in the Sierra Nevada regions. We are in a drought, so it has been super dry, and so the weather is orange and smoky. And Corey, you guys will probably get additional smoke as this all blows wet east. So sadly, it is orange weather again today. Not as orange as last year, mind you, but it is got that orange tinge to it. So, but the weather is beautiful. It is nice, perfect. 68 to 75 degrees all day today, so I shouldn't complain too much. So that's what we got going on in the Bay Area. Just pop into the news real quick. Just a reminder that you can go register for VMworld. It's going to be an exciting show. We've got the VMTN V Brown Bag sessions all booked in. We have the VMware Code sessions all booked in. Thanks for everybody that submitted sessions this year. They should be good. They're going to be live. You can go register today. Schedule Builder opens up September 8th. VMworld this year is October 5th through the 7th. And I know they've made some announcements on some key people they're going to have some celebrities come do interviews and such. I think they announced the first one is Michael J. Fox. So Carol Kennedy, our CMO, is going to be interviewing Michael J. Fox. So that should be a lot of fun. And I know they got other big names they're going to bring in. So instead of doing a big, rock band party, I think this year they're going to intersprinkle really cool people to come in and talk to us live during the event. So that should be fun. So look forward to that. Go register, be part of the show. And I think that's it. Corey, I don't think you got any vExpert news. Congrats to all the vExperts that just got their nominations. And I think that's it for news.
Yeah, I do have a couple of things for news. vExperts, I've got an email coming out for blog articles around sessions. It'll be another email that I'm sending out. This one will be a little bit more detailed of exactly what we're looking for, and to have some URLs and some things we can provide. And also the vExpert party for both EMEA and US. Those invites are going to be out by Monday, so I'm just kind of combing through the schedule. but look for those. I'll mention it in Slack as well as an email. And so, really excited about both of those.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, with that, let's do the formal introduction. Mohan Pathri. I don't think that's his right name either, but he'll correct me as always on this show. It is my hallmark of not being able to say last names. So, Mohan, why don't you tell us a little bit about how long you've been at VMware and what have you done in your career arc before you came to VMware? How did you get where you are today? We'll do a couple minutes on that, and then we'll get to the main topic.
Thanks, Eric. I have been in the industry for more than 20 years, so I've been working in a lot of big corporations, so including Lockheed Martin, Dean Witter Brokerage, SanDisk before I came to VMware. I've been at VMware for almost 11 years now, and 6 years ago I got my VCDX, and I was a consultant for VMware initially, traveling around the US. Evangelizing SAP application virtualization. And over the past 2-3 years now, I'm focusing on AI, ML, and modern apps. And so I blog regularly, and that's part of my role. And I also speak in a lot of VMworld and other conferences.
Very nice. What VCDX number are you? I think you're under 100, if I remember right.
Yes, I'm 98. I thought I would get the 100, but I guess they put me in front of the other two that qualified after me, I guess. So.
Yeah, that can happen. But I think there's something to be said to be under 100. You're 2 digits, so I like the idea that you can be under 2 digits on the VCDX. I think they're up in the 300s or 400s now. So it's an exclusive club, but it is growing. So on the, what we're going to be talking about today is Kubernetes, right? And you have this great 3-part blog article. You can go to blogs.vmware.com/apps/cloud-native. That's the URL. So blogs.vmware.com/apps/cloud-native. Go to that one and look at it. It's now listed right at the top of their blog, a 3-part series where you kind of take us through, how to run Kubernetes, not only build your own Kubernetes cluster and then manage it, but then extend it out into the cloud and then, be able to, then the third blog is showing a real world application and all the settings and all the configuration you need to run that application. So really neat blog series. Why don't you tell me a little bit about how you got started doing this blog, and then we'll dive into the part 1, which is covering kind of the whole architecture around Tanzu and how Tanzu should be set up in a data center environment. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started on this blog?
Yeah, so I belong to the BU called the Cloud Services BU. So our main focus is multi-cloud. And some of the areas that we focus on with AI, ML, and others interact with Kubernetes. And so we want to make sure that we bring to our customers how we could potentially deploy Kubernetes across multi-cloud. And to do that, we need to, we need to make sure that a lot of operational aspects, security aspects are all taken care of. So that's kind of when I came upon Tanzu Service Mesh and Tanzu Mission Control, which actually are part of the management and the networking BU that inside VMware. But these products actually act as a glue that could potentially bunch all your Kubernetes instances together and give you one area to manage from. And so that's kind of where I came up with the idea. I wanted to build a multi-cloud Kubernetes, but at the same time, I want to make sure it's secure and we're able to manage it in a good, efficient manner. And that's kind of where I came up with this solution.
Yeah, it's a really nice series, and I know that we should just go through each of the major components because I think that it is neat. If you haven't spent time with Kubernetes, then this is a really good series. Part 1 is really good for you. Then part 2 goes into things like Tanzu Mission Control, which is the multi-cloud, and then part 3 is the example. So maybe we can just go through part 1, which is when we are looking at Tanzu, right? Tanzu really is based on the Tanzu Grid product, and that's really an architecture that kind of is laid out like what a basic Tanzu environment would look like, right? And I know that we have on, if you're watching vBarbecue, we've showed your figure 4 from your first diagram that talks about all the components that you would need to have a modern day Kubernetes environment based on Tanzu. Do you want to take us kind of through some of this and maybe set the stage of why this is the first place you would want to start?
Yes, so the Tanzu Kubernetes grid is a Kubernetes that VMware supports that runs across clouds. So there are different variants to it, and depending on where you want to run your Tanzu Kubernetes, you would use the appropriate Tanzu Kubernetes grid solution. And but once you decide that you're going to run it across multiple data centers or different clouds, then you would want to create or design what we call as a namespace. So what a namespace gives you is a construct where you are able to look at all your Kubernetes implementations that are bound to a particular application and manage them in a single pane of glass. And so that's kind of what so Tanzu Kubernetes Grid gives you the capability to run anywhere in the cloud. So you could run Kubernetes on-prem, public cloud, and the edge, and then you take that and then you layer on top of it other VMware solutions that make it easily manageable and secured. So
right. So when I'm looking at this grid, we have user namespaces and you have your pod definitions. Why don't you take us through the components that I'm looking at here?
So the user namespace is where you have all the components relating to the user, where the user is able to interact, developers are able to interact with Kubernetes using the kubectl commands and able to deploy new pods. They're able to also leverage the storage, the networking plugins available. So you could potentially use NSXT components, storage components as well, and then so compute, storage, and networking can be defined in as part of a pod and then used. So that's kind of what we see in the left-hand side, and then you have more of the management and the control plane aspects showing up in the service namespaces, and then you have vCenter server, which is also since 7.x has been integrated with Tanzu, so you're able to leverage cluster API, which is part of the Tanzu control plane that you can use to deploy new clusters and manage the pods and the users that you currently have.
Yeah, and I like the layered approach to this because it kind of shows you where ESXi runs at the bottom, right? And then you have your supervisor cluster that sits on top of that, right? That you can manage all the additional clusters that are then on top of those. And then each one of these on the right hand side are kind of defining, functionality. Are these running like in a VM? Like where does the VM line on these right services run? Obviously, the left side of their pods, right? So they're absolutely clusters, right, that are running. But on this right side, I'm trying to think how do I segment what's a system, a VM versus a Kubernetes cluster? So
if you look at even your left-hand side, the bottom layer under Tanzu Kubernetes cluster are VM. So if you look at the foundation, the foundation of Kubernetes, there are master nodes and worker nodes. So the control plane. You don't see the master nodes here. The master nodes are included in the service namespaces. So, but the VMs that you have running the pods usually are running more than one pod at a time, and then they have a lot of even a pod can have more than one container. So a pod is actually a Kubernetes representation of container namespace, and containers, there could be more than one container running in a pod. And so it's like taking the container world and then running it on Kubernetes, and then you see the worker nodes on the left-hand side. And then if you look at the bottom where you have a supervisor cluster is where the actual pods are actually running directly on ESXi. To run these, it takes a little bit more complexity. The pods have to be ported to some extent. Some aspects that will work natively on a guest cluster. So you look at the top, that is what we call as a guest cluster. You have VMs and then you have pods on top, where you don't have a guest cluster where you're running directly on the hypervisor is the supervisor cluster. And then you have all the control plane components running under the service namespace.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So that's Tanzu Kubernetes Grid. I don't know if you have kind of the I'm just looking to see if you have like a example of what that GUI looks like. That is because it is a control plane of glass, I assume, and there is certainly a lot of configuration to get to this figure 4. But does Tanzu Kubernetes Grid give you a pane of glass to be able to help manage what's actually running here and the settings that need to be set up for each one of these boxes?
So Tanzu Kubernetes Grid has a Kubernetes console that is available by default, but what we use inside VMware is what we call, if you look at part 2 of the blog series, Tanzu Mission Control is where actually we get the single pane of glass. So we are able to import clusters. So let's say you have a cluster running in this example, right? In this blog series, I actually had 2 clusters, one running in a VMC on Dell EMC cluster and another one running on a VMC on AWS cluster. Both of these we have a direct connection to our data center. So these 2 clusters can see each other, and so from we deployed TKG, the Kubernetes clusters in each of these locations, and then what we do is we take Tanzu Mission Control. We say I want to add a new cluster, and then Tanzu Mission Control is a cloud managed service from VMware that provides you an ability to import Kubernetes clusters. It could be TKG clusters, it could be AWS EKS clusters, and any cluster from any cloud provider. You need to be, there's a process that you follow where you go and add details of the cluster, and then there is a command that you have to go run inside the cluster. And once you run that command inside the cluster, certain components are installed for management, and these components then communicate with Tanzu Mission Control. So once that happens, let's say I had these 2 clusters that I had in these 2 different locations. I added them to Tanzu Mission Control. Then I'm able to be able to manage the cluster, look at the health of these clusters, look at what is running, and manage it from a central location. So that's kind of how we do this.
Yeah, I did share a screen, or you can look at the part 2 of the blog and see how Tanzu Mission Control is actually, engaged to look at this content, display what you've got. And so I'll share that as we look at that. And then I'll share the application as well. So when you're building this, were you able to talk to customers that have started to use Tanzu to get some experience on, are people able to do this yet? I know that when you're building kind of a dual cloud Tanzu environment, that's pretty new, right? But on the other hand, these the consoles look fairly robust, right? So it's almost like you must have some customers that are actually attempting to use this stuff to manage a multi-cloud Tanzu environment. I guess my question for you is how much of this have you seen in practice yet? Have you seen anyone attempting to do a multi-cloud Kubernetes environment?
So what I heard from customers is they want to be able to do this. They haven't. They're just getting into multi-cloud, so they have these disjoint Kubernetes clusters that they're not able to leverage, and they're not able to actually run an application across clouds. And so what my goal was to actually do a solution, showcase all the components on what it takes to build it, so that the customers who want to do this in their environment can do it. So that was the motivation. The fact that multi-cloud is something a lot of our customers are looking at, but they are unsure if there's anything out there that can make it work seamlessly, and that's kind of where VMware Tanzu Mission Control comes in.
Right. And I'll pop over to your blog article that actually kind of shows the building of a solution where you actually look at the YAML files. You look at, how to set this up, what the service mesh needs to look like in order to create a storefront that would be working in a multi-cloud environment where you actually have some of the services. I think you have a diagram here that
that one.
shows
Yeah, that one.
some of the services going out to the VMC and AWS Tanzu environment versus on a Dell EMC Tanzu environment.
Yes. So the first thing that we did was obviously deploy the TKG clusters on these two locations. Then, as I mentioned earlier, we had Tanzu Mission Control where we imported these services into the mission control, so we're able to look at them. Then we do what we call as a service mesh. So that is another service that is available from VMware. So it's a cloud-based service. So you bring service mesh into it, deploy it into these clusters, just like you did Tanzu Mission Control. Now the clusters are bound, and you can create something called a global namespace. So when you create a global namespace, you're creating a security domain that can cross multi-cloud boundaries, and everything's encrypted, and all the clusters, the Kubernetes clusters, can talk to each other across cloud boundaries in a secure manner, and that's kind of what service mesh provides you. And then the global namespace is how you do that. And so in this case, as you see in this diagram, figure 24, the Kubernetes cluster in VMC on Dell EMC and the Kubernetes cluster on AWS both are part of the same global namespace, and they're part of the components. I think the web and the app components are deployed on the top there, and then the database and the other components are on the bottom. So we kind of used an example application that's that is distributed and multi-tier. And so you see that one tier exists in a different cloud, and other tiers exist in another cloud. And we are able to actually show you a video, and a link for which is in the blog, that that shows the application working between the two locations seamlessly.
Yeah, some of the things that I looked at when I'm looking at this is when you're talking about services, right? Services, there's a catalog service, right? Which I guess it's running kind of in a LAMP or some other environment, right? Like it's obviously Kubernetes app defined. You have a YAML file that says what's going to start, but you actually have a stack there, whether it's Apache or Nginx or whatever, with something running on it that has a definition of a service that your main app is going to reach out and talk. And what we're talking about is just the connectivity between the systems and Kubernetes that's delivering those services, whether it be MongoDB, because I see your catalog as a catalog Mongo, which I would assume is a database service that's running, but it's actually got a LAMP stack there that's actually running that service that's defined in a Kubernetes pod, right? That then runs, right? Is that kind of how I'm trying to take it all the way from the Kubernetes container environment up to what's actually running in these little boxes?
So if you go look at figure 21, that's kind of where you see some of the YAML, the application components that we're using. So there's Acme Fitness Cluster. So we create a component of the cluster, one aspect of it in one location, and then another aspect of it in the second location. And then we have the secrets file that's used for communication and between the two locations. And so that's kind of what we use. And as you mentioned, Mongo is our database, a backend database that's also linked to it. And this is an example app that's available usually inside VMware for showing our customers, and we leverage that for the solution.
Okay, right. So I've always wondered, what is the actual code running, and if I look at the storefront, the Acme Fitness storefront, this code is actually there. It's web code. It's probably Python that's that's actually displaying the app, talking back to the database, and then these components, whether you have the shopping, the cart, the order entry, or it could be all Python interacting with these components that are all running in a pod that's then running on a cluster that's then running on a cloud, right? And that
Yes.
what Tanzu Mission Control is doing is just controlling where those clusters are actually running, and then you're giving you data on how healthy the cluster is, as well as how healthy the pod definition is, and the application that the pod definition is part of the app, right? Or the components that are running that.
Yes, and there is one component I don't really show in the blog that also could be very useful. It's based on our Wavefront platform, and it's called Tanzu Observability. And so that gives you like a holistic view from a monitoring standpoint, where you can see, you can get metrics on what's running and what the performance metrics of all these apps are, and it kind of gives you that observability view that makes sure you understand any kind of constraints or problems that you've come across in this kind of distributed environment.
Okay, so given that you're a VCDX number 98, right, and you have been through architectures and you are an architect, when you're looking at this definition of building Tanzu infrastructure versus VM infrastructure, I feel like there's an order more complexity, because you're getting into the internals of the application and how the applications are actually laid out, versus if you are managing infrastructure. But correct me if I'm wrong, because you are a VCDX, you've done this a lot, architected a lot. It seems like for VMs, you're just basically creating VMs and handing a VM off, to an application team who's going to put the LAMP stack on it and then run their application right on top of the, whether it's WordPress or some other app. Does this feel more complicated? And does this feel like, as an IT administrator, you have to pay attention more to how the apps are laid out, right? And working closer with the app team, because it feels like before I would just hand somebody a VM and say, hey, your VM's provisioned with this, a DB and whatever, go forward. Where now you're actually, Tanzu, you do have to have grid, you do have to do mission control across multiple domains. What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, it is way more complex. Think of it this way, right? You have a new layer now, and then the new layer and all the components that sometimes in the past have been combined have been broken into microservices. So there is a need to some extent for a VI admin to learn a little bit of Kubernetes as well. That's kind of where the world is going. And so you don't need to be a developer at a developer level, but it's good to know basic Kubernetes commands and stuff like that. But even to deploy some of these components, you need to run kubectl. So like to deploy Tanzu Mission Control, you need to run a command inside a worker node, and then run kubectl command. So that's kind of what. So it is complex, but that's the reason VMware is actually trying to make it simpler, because the complexity, as you can see, if you can run across clouds, you want to be able to link these together from an architecture perspective. We can design all these things, but to manage it and secure it is a huge problem. And so that's kind of where you put your VMware kind of is using all its core competencies to bring all these together, so that a VI admin can manage a modern apps environment, while the developers. The other important thing here is the developer can directly interact with this environment. In the old legacy VM environments, they usually get a VM, and then they don't necessarily interact at the level that. Right. That they do here. So that's the big difference.
Yeah, that's what I noticed in spending time with your blog articles and getting to know this, is that you do, because Kubernetes manages pod payloads, right? You do get exposed to the payment payload and the order payload and the database payload. And the management app is actually, you can get status on, what your YAML definition of that app is doing and how it's running, right? In the grid. And so that's a level deeper than I think I ever managed, right? Because to your point, you'd give us a VM and they would run the app. I wouldn't get it. And it's almost like I see a little bit of us, running, Java stack, kind of extra pieces that the application is using, right? Well, back when we were doing, Java, that was kind of, you'd start looking at what layers are actually running Tomcat, right? You would look at Tomcat and is Tomcat running properly? And this is kind of that layer down, which is I'm actually, each one of these pieces is a microservice, and the microservice is running in Kubernetes. And maybe I have to use kube control to launch them, stop them, start them, whatever, restart them, see status. But then I'm actually, the infrastructure is paying attention to that, right? And so it's not so much more complicated as it is just, you need management tools to be able to give you visibility and restart capability and securities capability and so forth. And so this is where I think if you are building a modern Kubernetes platform layer, you do need more management tools to be able to kind of manage all the microservices and what's actually happening between all of them.
Right, and if you think about how we used to do the LAMP stack before, obviously, we had to start with Linux, then deploy Apache, then you have deploy MySQL, and then PHP. Right, all these components are the LAMP stack. So now everything's a file. So whole thing's a file. It's a YAML file. So you just run a kubectl apply or create command, and boom, you have the app running. So, but there is a lot of complexity with networking. So VM networking is much simpler. Here you have almost everything is fenced off. So NAT inside NAT inside NAT inside NAT. So it's kind of very complex on networking, and you have to port forward for everything. So there's a lot of complexities involved, and that's kind of where you using tools like what VMware provides gives you a big advantage, because otherwise to even expose your app to the outside world is a big challenge.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's another piece to it. Now you're actually, because you have zero trust everywhere and you have all these microservices, you actually have to define, the governance model for how things are going to be talking to each other and then manage those, right?
Right, exactly. And so the namespace gives you that construct where you can put all these microservices together and have them talking to each other. And also, as you see on the top, you have the security team being able to be part of this process and make sure that everything is secure, even though the workloads are across multiple clouds.
Yeah, and this is really, if I step back a little bit and just think about as an IT administrator, and this is where we're all jumping. It's kind of like, wow, I need to go get my VCDX certification in all of Kubernetes and Tanzu, because it's almost like a whole nother giant space to have a 20-year career managing infrastructure that is now offering up Kubernetes microservice environments, and let alone then defining that in the way that you can manage it across multiple clouds. Right, like it's like a
yes, and it is right. It is evolved, and the beauty of this VMware platform is that not everything's going to the modern apps. So there is quite a bit of infrastructure that still exists in private clouds and public clouds, which are virtual machine based. So we can combine all of this. So the namespace, the Tanzu service mesh and mission control, all these things work with VMs as well. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. And we are right now in a hybrid world, in the sense. So some apps are being modernized whilst others still exist in the legacy world. So we have to be able to manage both.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I was on vSphere 6.5 this weekend, and I'm just running a WordPress environment, and things started getting slower because we started putting more stuff in there, and you just realize how nice it is just to be able to go into the console and click on the VM, click on the database VM, and add more memory, add another virtual CPU in it, and it's just like very clean and nice and stable, and the menus are there, the management constructs are there, and everything just behaves, right? And I've looked at how long my ESXi was up, and it's up for like 98 days or 100. Haven't touched it, right? Like it's just sitting there running away. And I built Kubernetes on Raspberry Pis for a couple labs for people the last couple of years of VMworld, and when we were in physical presence. And there's a lot of complexity to keep everything running, right? And it reminds me of the VI3, Virtual Infrastructure 3 days back, 12 years ago, right? Like there's a lot of hands-on. And then I now look at vSphere 6.5 and like, it's all just mouse click happiness, right? Right mouse click, pop up properties, edit a couple things, save it, right? As long as you got your licenses, everything is running perfect. You could go edit things, add resources dynamically. It's just so nice and easy now. And I look at Kubernetes, where on Raspberry Pi it's super complicated. I spend days trying to make things work, and then it would work, and then things would be flaky and would not work. And you could get it, but it was just an immense amount of work. And then I look at what VMware is doing with the Tanzu portfolio and all the pieces we're talking about here, and you see the GUIs, right? And it's giving you nice data. It's giving you little green green buttons that are telling you the status of things, and you realize that this is going to be the way you're going to need to do this, right? Especially, then I'm talking multi-cloud yet. I'm just talking about running Tanzu applications, right? You really do want nice, clean, high-quality GUIs that are up and running, that are giving you things that you can right-click on and see what's wrong with them or see what's right with them, and replicate them, and it's just works, right?
Yeah. If you look at how a vanilla Kubernetes works, and they have a dashboard. You can dashboard itself runs on top of the cluster. The way you get to the dashboard is through SSH port forwarding. So literally, it's so nested that you actually have to port forward. You have to SSH into the worker node and then port forward the dashboard out so that you can see that in your browser. So those are the types of things that could make it really, really hard for operationalizing the solutions, and that's kind of where what we build from a Tanzu mission control service mesh really is value add.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see that, and I got to imagine that that's just the way everything is going to go over time, right? That you're just not going to be able to scale it this big. And then there's a piece of me that wonders whether everybody's. It reminds me of the days of Sun Microsystems back in the early 90s when I worked there in 94, 95. There was Neo or Do distributed objects everywhere, right? Where you had this idea of, microservices, but they just called it distributed objects, right? Because C++ was popular then, and people realized you could build objects. And so everybody started building what I would call modern day microservices out of C++ objects, right? And then building a framework, and that all collapsed on itself because of the weight of management, right? It was just not worth trying to figure out how to build object-oriented stuff runs everywhere because you could not manage it all, right? And so I look now and I go, okay, we've done that for VMs, and I think VMware did really well because instead of trying to manage all the distributed app pieces, VMware just went, no, we'll just make one VM called the operating system, and you can treat each operating system like an object. How's that? And then we'll give you a GUI to just drag and drop operating systems around as objects. And we lived the heydays. VMware won that because their architecture was no, not a bunch of little microservices, just operating. So let's just make a VM be an operating system, and we'll go that route. And that worked. That was digestible. Now we've gotten more sophisticated, right? And things matured. It is 20 years later, and now we're trying to tackle the application components. And Google did it because Google's a monster, and we're able to have their own data center, build their own systems. And yes, if you make a single monster thing in your Google, you make a lot of money. You can make that happen. And now Kubernetes is trying to go mainstream into kind of the data center world, and now you have to try to manage all these microservices and all their connection and endpoints. And I think without something as high a quality as VMware, I wouldn't want to have to do this as a job, right? Like, but
Exactly. And when we did the OS part, right, we encapsulated the file system, the operating system in a file. So now the entire application is a file, the container. So the dependencies, all the imagine. Like some applications you might recall from your own experience, it could take weeks to deploy in the past. Right now the entire application is in a container, so everything, the dependencies are already worked out by the software provider. So they give you a container. So all you have to do is an environment. All you need is an environment where containers can run and be managed. So that's kind of where the world is going. And so Kubernetes is an essential part of that. And so the complexity is growing, but we need to be able to still keep up with it.
yeah, I agree. And I think that VMware's user interface technology and the stability of their infrastructure is strong enough now that I think that you could actually do this at scale and make it work. And so I actually look at what Raghu is saying when he talks about VMware has all the technology, all the pieces, and nobody else has all of this. Not only is just single multi-cloud, that we are in a good position to be able to enable this and make this digestible for people, where it could actually be used and scaled. And if I were running an enterprise right now, I would be, and I was looking at making microservices, I would be considering VMware, because just they take the complexity out of doing this. And there's the enticement of just going native on cloud, right, and not dealing with this layer in here. But I think that would be a giant mistake, because being able to manage it, you need this layer.
Yes, when you're doing small experiments, you can go to the cloud and have your own standalone environment. But when you want to productionalize something and do something that's truly multi-cloud, you would need something like what the VMware portfolio provides for manageability.
Right. So I always ask guests, like, what excites you about, you've done these 3 blog articles, right? And you have them here. What else are you trying to do? Are you just saying VMworld's coming up? Are you going to do any sessions on this? What else are you going to try to do? Are you going to try to do a part 4 to this? What keeps you busy for the rest of the year?
Yeah, so I'm taking the same concepts, and then my focus area inside VMware is AI and ML. So the issue is with that, there's some complexity in the sense AI ML is accelerated by GPUs. GPUs or other accelerators, so things can run many times faster than a CPU if you have a GPU capability. So we have that capability for VMs right now. It's not very seamless when it comes to giving GPU access to a pod, for example. Let's say somebody wants to run an AI ML application in a container on our Kubernetes environment. They have to jump through a lot of hoops to make it work. So those are the areas I'm working on, and I have a workshop with my colleague Justin Murray about AI ML on VMware in VMworld, along with another breakout session.
No, that's fantastic. I know that we did interviews last year with Justin on vGPUs and AI and where the state of the industry is. And we actually had a couple other people on the show talking about where that's going and some interesting pieces of that. We had Robert Scoble, who focuses on just AI and different companies that are doing AI. So that's an exciting place, and certainly allowing cloud resources to be harnessed, right? Because that's it's hard to get GPUs, which we were talking about that with Tony Foster. The GPU shortages, chip shortages, and the fact that the big cloud vendors are able to get them and deploy them is also just interesting from a standpoint of, if you're trying to get work done, this is maybe a way to do it as well.
Right.
Yeah. So that should keep you busy. You got a session at VMworld. So look for what's Justin's last name again?
Murray.
Justin Murray and Mohan look for you. I don't suppose you have a session ID, so but go search for that. And
1317 and 1322.
1317 and 1322. Great. Oh, there you go. We'll put that in chat. We can publish that on our YouTube channel. We'll do that while we're talking. All right, it's 13. Say that again.
1317 and 1322. I think there's a VI in front of it.
A VI 1317
Mm-hmm.
and VI 1322. Go sign up for those. And have you guys recorded them yet?
No, we scheduled it early September.
Early September. All right.
One
great.
of them is live. It's a workshop, so that will be live. So.
Nice. All right. Good. That's even better. I was going to ask that too. Like, are you doing anything live, or is it all just recorded? I figured it was recorded. So that'll keep you guys busy. I love the blog article. And definitely go check that out if you're trying to understand how to set up your Kubernetes environments. Multi-cloud is interesting as well, so that's good. And just the definitions of all the components. If you haven't spent time with Tanzu, right, you cover good all the pieces. You start at multi-cloud, then you take it into what are the components of the Tanzu grid, then the Tanzu service mesh, then finally Tanzu mission control. I assume that you still want to run everything. If you're running a Tanzu app and you're not going multi-cloud, you still want to do a Tanzu grid deployment, though, correct?
Yes, you could have multiple, even if you're running it in one location, you would have multiple clusters,
Right.
multiple users, and you want to be able to leverage namespaces to kind of segregate the users, the apps from each other and stuff like that. And that's kind of, you still would need when you start having more than one user and more than one app, then you would want to have this kind of capability.
Right. All right. Last but not least, are you on Twitter?
Yes, at Mohan Poteri.
Okay, there you go. And I will spell that for people that are listening to the show. Let's see if we can do the spelling here. Got to go up to the right spot in my file here. Where are you? MOHNPOTHERI. So at MOHANPOTHERI.
Yes.
Got your name. I don't have my name on Twitter. I was too slow. Right. There are too many Eric Nielsen's out there, right? So everybody, Eric and everybody wants that. So there you go. Okay, we're coming up to the we've been at this for 50 minutes. Any other last things that you would like to share on the topic or on your area in the company? Other things that you might want to convey to the 3,000 or 4,000 people that download us weekly? Any other things to share?
Yeah, to the audience, I would want to emphasize that we are in a world that's changing. The applications are slowly migrating from what we are used to the modern app world. So it would be very useful for you guys all to go look at Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, play with it, learn a little bit of the command line and the components relating to Kubernetes, because that's kind of where the hybrid world is heading towards.
Yeah, I agree. And because you have vSphere 7 now, there's no reason you just can't put it on your home lab and get started and run it. I think you need, if you look at figure, I think it was 4 or whatever the figure was we covered, there are enough components that it's going to be a multiple VMs, right, to run this. So you're going to want to have a fairly decent sized lab machine. I think William Lamb showed how to run Tanzu on a 120 gig memory. He wanted 120 gig of memory to have enough memory to run all the components properly and have kind of a scaled environment. I think you can run it on smaller, obviously, but is an architecture with vSphere and VMs that you're going to have enough VMs that you're going to want to have a fairly nice sized home lab. I think I have a home lab machine now that has 120 gig of memory in it, right? So you can actually run it there. But it is, even that's a tight sized one, because this is I would say that Tanzu is an enterprise class environment, right? This is not running Kubernetes on Raspberry Pis where you couldn't really run much of a workload there.
Right. The beauty about Tanzu is with vSphere 7, you can literally, you don't need to go, you can deploy everything with GUI. So literally, and so you could potentially deploy TKG, not TKG, you can deploy Tanzu via GUI. And so you can then interact with it from the command line.
Yeah, I would say that I'm super impressed with with VMware's ability now to GUI, build nice GUIs that allow you to do this with mouse and point and click to the point of doing it on Raspberry Pis where everything is a cube control, right? And then even experiencing cube control commands that you read the manuals and they go, well, they don't all work all the time. You can't destroy a VM. You actually have to do it this way. It takes 5 minutes or 10 minutes for that to actually happen. So there's a lot of finesse in it, where when you start looking at the VMware products and the notifications, it actually really helps being able to do it through a GUI.
Right.
I never thought I'd say that because I'm a shell guy.
Me too. I'm also a command line guy. I'm a Unix sysadmin from the past. So.
Right, exactly. And then that's when you realize that, wow, okay, it has been a few years since I've been over here. And now that I'm over here looking at this, I'm like, thank God there's GUIs, right? Because you really do need them to make this work. All right. Well, with that, Mohan, we do at the end of the podcast, because we're on vBarbecue on YouTube. Thanks everybody for listening to the show. We always ask people, you and others, and we'll invite Corey Romero to come back in. We're going to talk a little vBarbecue. And so first I'll ask Corey Romero, and then I'll pop over to Mohan. And Mohan, you can just think either what's your favorite barbecue to barbecue yourself, or what's your favorite barbecue shop, right? But Corey, tell us about barbecue this weekend.
Yeah, so these weren't actually barbecued, but they were cooked. And I do a lot of smoking, but these are actually boiled. So these are crawfish caught here locally in Utah. I went scuba diving and we dove at around 35 feet max, but we found that the crawfish like to sit between 20, 25 feet. And so we were catching these with our bare hands, literally just, they jump right in front of you and you grab them. And then we ended up bringing home 40, 50 of these guys. And then I went back again 2 days later and caught 40 or 50 more for a second meal that we had. But these were absolutely delicious. They taste just like mini lobsters. I brought them home. My wife and I cooked them up, and the four of us, we sat with our two sons and just had a fantastic feast of crawfish.
So I see
my nephew.
And I see corn. I see corn and crawfish, and that's just, is that bowls of butter on each side? So
yeah, they're bowls of butter.
I think we should boot you off the show, because I don't think this is barbecue. This is just boiled seafood.
Okay, well, so we were 12-ish feet away from the barbecue. So maybe that helps. But yeah, we had potatoes in there. We had,
I think you should have just said that you smoke these or something. You could argue that. Oh yeah, well, I put seasoning on them. They were absolutely boiled barbecue. You and Matt Longer. Matt cooks on propane, and Corey barbecues by boiling things. I got it now. But that's awesome.
Hey, I will put up my smoking techniques and abilities against anyone.
And anyone. All right, Mohan. So now you get to finish out with barbecue. Either have you barbecued? What's your favorite barbecue, or a barbecue place you like to go to?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm a boring guy because relating to barbecue, because I'm vegetarian. But yeah, mushrooms, barbecue mushrooms a lot. So that's.
Yeah, you can definitely do some nice work with mushrooms and a cheese coating. And so my wife has done mushrooms. I forget the big ones. What do you call the big ones? I'm just forgetting the name of the big giant mushrooms that you make.
Portobello.
Yeah.
Portobello, yes.
Portobello mushrooms, and then she'll coat them with cheese and then broccoli on top, and then she'll broil those in the broiler so that they get crispy on top. Very nice, very nice. I've never tried to actually put one on a barbecue and smoke them though, but I think you can do that too. I think you can make smoked portobello mushrooms, but you got to be careful because if you overdo them, the mushrooms will shrink and dry until you have like a tiny little mushroom, as opposed to you need to know when to get them off before they get too dry, right? So
yes, and there's a lot of water underneath too. It dehydrates quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I think my wife made some maybe 3 weeks ago where she did them really nice and did a couple of different layers on top of the mushrooms, so they are amazing. Except the first set she left them on too long, and they were like the size of like silver dollars, right? They're supposed to be the size of a softball, and they were size of a ping pong ball by the time we were done. The mushrooms had dried out quite a bit, so you got to be careful with those. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Mohan, for being on, and thanks for doing the great blog articles. I would encourage everybody to go look for his sessions and register because they're fun to watch. And again, because it's VMworld is at scale. There's no limited seat capacity, so that should be fun. Maybe your live session has a limit of maybe 500 to 1,000. I'll take that back a little bit. I think the live sessions do get restricted down to, but I've never seen 1,000 people on them, so I think you're good to go. So thanks a lot for being here, Corey. Thanks for being here as well. And we will be back again next week. Until then, everybody go get some barbecue, have some fun, and enjoy the last bits of your summer. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.